Welcome to Confidently Speaking, the podcast that'll get you to fall in love with your own version of English.
Hello, everybody. Very good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you guys are in the world. Welcome to Confidently Speaking with your host, Frank Shavira. So how is everybody doing? Guys, I can't tell you how excited I am to be talking to you for the second time ever on a podcast format. So during our previous episode, I told you everything about the history of this podcast and how much I procrastinated. Now, on this specific episode, we're going to be talking about how to understand unclear speakers. I sincerely hope you guys are ready for this because, this is going to be an amazing one. So let's get started without any further ado. You guys ready? Let's get to it. In the international business arena, and we meet people with very different cultural and linguistic backgrounds. Their levels of English vary, as do their accents and styles of speaking. It is not always easy for people to understand each other, especially when speaking on a video call. So it can be embarrassing if you continually have to interrupt the other person to tell them that you're not following what they're saying, right? But hey, there are some simple techniques that can help when it is difficult to understand what they're saying, right? So let's look at some of these techniques. Check this out. Number one is setting a good example. It's important that you speak as you would like to be spoken to. Speak clearly, speak slowly, but not too slowly. Speaking very slowly can send your listeners to sleep, so you need to vary your sleep, right? Add in some variety, but make sure that your speech is clear. You need to use pauses. They help your listeners to digest more easily what you're saying, kind of like what I just did. You need to stress the most important word or phrase in a sentence, because this will make it easy for your listeners to take on board your ideas, to accept your ideas. Guys, when we're talking about stress, we're talking about three different aspects, right? The first one is that we make the words louder. We make them longer, and then we make them higher in pitch. These are the three elements of stress, right? And those words that we stress, because English is a stress-timed language rather than syllable-timed, it's stress-timed, right? Those words that carry the meaning are known as content words, right? And then we're supposed to stress those. And function words or grammar words are usually reduced. All right. Now you also need to articulate your words. This makes everything you say clearer to your listeners, and it prevents you from swallowing sounds, which makes it difficult for your listeners to make out what you're saying. If you set a good example, your speaking partners will often try to imitate your style and approach, and this makes your life that much easier. Now let's go ahead and talk about number two, which is keeping control. It is important to keep control of the conversation. If someone speaks too quickly, hey, ask them to slow down. There's no shame in that. If they speak too quietly, guess what? Ask them to speak up. If you want to write something down, hey, tell them to spell the words for you because, hey, there's no shame in that. Ask the other person to repeat anything you do not hear properly and repeat keywords or phrases they said to make sure you have understood. Now, what's important right here is to not hesitate when you do these things. Sometimes we hope we will be able to interpret or catch the meaning if we continue to listen. But guess what happens? Most of the time you just end up eventually losing the thread of a conversation. And then it'll be more difficult and, even embarrassing to go back to the beginning when you go like, oh, sorry, like, could you say everything you just said again? And they've been speaking for like 3 minutes. And that's only because you didn't have the guts to tell them to, like to interrupt them and then tell them that what they said, you didn't really comprehend. So, hey, there's no shame in going like, oh, sorry, like, what did you just say? If they say, so we're going to meet on Wednesday, right? And then you didn't understand the word Wednesday. So you go like, so we're going to meet when, right? Or did you say Wednesday? Kind of like that. Alrighty. Now, moving on now to number 3, which is listening carefully. If you listen carefully, you will improve both your understanding and the flow of the dialogue. So, as you're having the conversations, you need to show interest by nodding or using encouraging words and encouraging sounds. Kind of like, oh, really? Oh, come on, really? Wow. Nope, I don't believe it. Wow. Okay, so kind of like that. Now, these signals tell your interlocutor or your partner that you have understood and you want them to continue. You also need to allow silence so that the other person can collect their thoughts. Let me say that again. Allow silence so that the other person can understand what you're saying. They can collect their thoughts. If you jump in too quickly, hey, you may be interrupting a key message. And this is very important, guys, because I am a firm believer that nowadays, everybody focuses on themselves, right? So even when you're having a conversation, even when we are having a conversation, most of the time, we're just thinking about our next intermission. We're thinking about what we're going to say in our turn for speaking instead of paying attention to what the other person is saying. And I think this is an epidemic. Everybody is guilty of this. And especially for English learners, because we are thinking about grammar and pronunciation and how to best structure our thoughts when it'll be our time to speak. But hey, we shouldn't actually be doing that. The problem right there is that if you pay attention to what the other person's saying, it shows, right? And it's not only about being rude, it's actually a necessary requirement of any conversation, because when you pay attention to what the other person is saying, you can better interact with them and ask relevant questions, and just the conversation flows that much more smoothly. You also need to ask relevant questions to check understanding. Just like I said, if you pay attention to what the person is saying, you'll be able to create the best questions that are very relevant, right? So you also need to avoid finishing other people's sentences. And I'm raising my hand. I know you can't see me, but I'm actually raising my hand here because I'm guilty as charged here. And that's because I don't know why I guess it's because I'm a teacher, probably, but I have a tendency to help out struggling people, especially people who are struggling with their linguistic needs, right? So I don't know why. And this is something I should stop doing, but I inadvertently and without actually thinking about it, find myself finishing my students' ideas when they struggle to find the word, and that is not doing something good to their language acquisition, right? I have to let them struggle a little bit, but I don't know, like I just act naturally, and I'm working on this. But just remember, you need to avoid finishing other people's sentences, and this is not only rude when you do it, but it also means that you run the risk of putting your words into their mouth, right? So maybe you finish the sentence and then you say exactly the opposite of what they wanted to say, which is not at all what you want to do, right? Now, we need to summarize regularly to make sure that you are still on track, right? When you summarize, your partner can correct any misunderstandings. Alrighty, so if I understood correctly, you just told me that the meeting is going to be tomorrow and we all need to be wearing white. All right. That's weird, but all right. Okay, now let's go to number 4. Number 4 tells us that saying you don't understand is all right. If you don't understand something, it's important to say so. You can do this in many different ways. Check it out. The very first thing is you can say, sorry, and that's usually enough. Your partner will immediately explain a second time, and they will hardly notice the interruption. Sorry? And they say it again, and then they continue the conversation. Now, if you still don't understand, then you gotta use another one-word interruption, such as pardon, right? Pardon, come again, kinda. It's short, and it's hardly noticed. And once again, I guess your partner will repeat what they said, although this time it's going to be way more noticeable. But hey, what's the problem with that, right? Now, if you still don't understand at this point, you're going to have to use a full sentence, such as, I'm afraid I still didn't quite catch what you just said, right? I'm afraid. Repeat after me. I'm afraid I still didn't quite catch that, right? Or I'm afraid I'm gonna need you to repeat again, right? I didn't understand what you said, sorry, right? It is a polite phrase when you say, I'm afraid that, right? I'm afraid that. I didn't catch that is, of course, colloquial and friendly. That means everybody uses it, right? So, hey, it gets more difficult if you are still not sure what your partner has said, right? Now, if after they repeat it for the third time, you still haven't yet understood, you're going to have to be proactive and guess what was said. Because at this point, probably you're having a conversation that is completely going over your head, which is very unlikely if you're already able to establish a conversation. But hey, it might be it. So if you're proactive and guess what the other person's saying, you might be like, oh, you mean Tuesday? And then it doesn't really matter what you say. If you didn't understand the day, just go did you say Sunday? Any day works because the person's going to go what? No, I said Monday. Oh, okay. So then you got it for the fourth time, right? So, all right. After the fourth time. Alrighty, now let's go to number 5, which is being specific. Now, being specific means that you can also specify any pieces of information that you missed. For example, if somebody says, I'll be arriving on X day, you can say, sorry, which day was that? Now, this makes it clear to your speaking partner which part of a sentence you missed, right? Now, this technique saves a great deal of time and energy, but many second language speakers avoid it because it is slightly more complicated linguistically, right? You simply need to phrase the question in the right way, and all you have to do is practice. So you get this down, right? So let's now go to our point number 6, which is dealing with native speakers, right? Because, as of this point, all of the tips that we have been talking about have to do with how you can start a conversation with somebody who already speaks English, right? But not necessarily a native speaker, just unclear speakers, right? People who, might be native speakers of other languages, but they're also quite fluent in English, but difficult to understand, right? So the 6th point is actually dealing with native speakers. Hey, their fluency, wide vocabulary, and their self-confidence in the language often gives these people, native speakers, a natural advantage in international meetings. Now, they may also use slang and idiomatic expressions, idioms. They might have a strong regional dialect and speak quickly, or maybe even use special culture-bound humor. This is certainly evident with many of my students, actually, because whenever they join a meeting, they actually hate the first part of a meeting, which we call small talk, right? And they hate it because they are already quite familiar with the vocabulary necessary to do their job, right? But small talk, because at its essence, small talk is about talking about, just trivial things that have nothing to do with your job or with anything that's going on. Normally it has nothing to do with the meeting that you're about to have, right? But people talk about their life, talk about sports, talk about the weather, and these are just things that you can never plan for, right? So most of my students actually hate it because they feel like a fish out of water because they normally don't use English for, social interaction. It's usually for work, right? So, hey, when you talk to native speakers, they might talk about the game, right? They might talk about something that's culture bound, like, hey, I don't know, something Thomas Jefferson said, right? And if you haven't read anything about American history, then it's very unlikely that you're familiar with that, right? So this is difficult. So what can you do to understand native speakers? Well, unless they are reminded, native speakers are often unaware that, they have this effect on non-native speakers. So usually it is just enough to ask them, right, to slow down. Sometimes you just go ahead and start speaking like this, and maybe you don't understand them, right? And if that's the case, just go like, I'm sorry, like, could you slow down a little, right? That way they will go like, oh yeah, sorry about that. I didn't mean to, right? Like I didn't realize you were not understanding me or something like that, right? So occasionally you can also just remind them that English is not your native language, and they, most of the time, every time I've done that, they've been really nice to me. Native speakers have been awesome, and they never actually made a big fuss about it, right? But there might be some, bad people out there. But they were gonna be mean anyway, so it's actually not a problem if you tell them to slow down. If they don't want to slow down, probably that's because they're not nice people or they're in a hurry or something. Alrighty, but just go ahead and know that when you're speaking with native speakers or advanced users of a language, sometimes you need to explain to them what you mean, right? Sometimes you need to ask them for clarification, but that's pretty much, that's pretty much what you have to do. So guys, with these, we have covered the 6 different tips that I can give you when dealing with somebody who is difficult to be understood, right? And that's about right, because hey, it's almost time to wrap up. So thank you very much, guys, for your attention. Please make sure that you go over to TikTok, Instagram, X, YouTube, Facebook, and right here on your podcast platform, you can let me know what you think about this podcast, what kind of topics you would like me to focus on. And if there are any other requests, if you have any ideas for different sections that we could have in the podcast, different things, hey, just go ahead and let me know what you're thinking about this, because, hey, this is coming from the heart, but at the end of the day, this is 100% for you. So make sure that you let me know what you think so I can make it better for you. So thanks a lot, everybody. Remember that a follow, a like, a subscription doesn't cost anything, and it will certainly help me find find that person who is looking for my teaching style, and hey, who knows, maybe they will want to join this podcast, right? So thanks a lot, everybody, and remember, you can find me on all social media as @EnglishWithFrank, just like that. It has been a pleasure, everybody. Hope you have an amazing weekend. And no, you know what? I'm going to leave this there. I know I just made a mess, but I'm going to leave everything as is, because I told you from podcast 1, from the first episode, that these would be included. Thanks a lot, everybody. And I will see you next week with a fresh new episode of Confidently Speaking. Have a good one. Bye-bye.